I'm excited to share tonight because I'm going to talk about the Great Commission. Seems to fit in with what Jenny was just talking about. But I will never forget a time in high school when I finally got the courage to share the gospel with my best friend. And after fumbling my way through, Sue was her name, she looked at me and she said, "Are you telling me that if I don't become a Christian, I'm going to hell? If you believe that, why haven't you ever told me before? Don't you care about me?" She really said that. And let's see, every unbeliever truly may someday ask that same question, even if it's not until they're faced with an eternity apart from God. Why didn't you fill in the blank ever tell me? Didn't they care about me? And if you're like me, you don't want your name in that blank. So in Matthew 28, 18 through 20, Jesus entrusts his motley crew of 11 remaining disciples with this commission right before he returned to heaven. Then Jesus came to them and said, "All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me. Therefore, go and make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. And surely I'm with you to the end of the age." In just 3 short sentences here in this passage, Jesus crystallizes the mission of his body, the church, to make disciples of all nations. Jesus desires everyone to get a chance to become a follower of Christ. This commission is called the Great Commission for a reason. It's great in its scope, talks about all nations and teaching everything Jesus commanded, and then in duration, to be done until the end of the age. So in this passage, you may notice that the main verb is to make disciples, and it includes 3 steps. We make disciples by going, baptizing, and teaching every disciple to obey his commands. And what was his final and most important command? To go and make disciples. So one key definition of a disciple of Jesus is a person who makes disciples of Jesus. Disciples make disciples. So if you want to be a disciple, where do you start? To begin with, you start right where you live and by telling what you know to people you know. When my husband and I and our 5 children moved from Colorado to Texas about 25 years ago, I felt a bit stressed about finding the right place to live. And then one day, right before we left on a house hunting trip, I read Acts 17:26 in an old translation of the NIV. And it said that verse this way, that God has determined the time set for us and the exact places we should live. And why would he care exactly where we live? The next verse says his purpose is for the nations to seek after God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him, though he is not far from any one of us. God comforted me at that time with the knowledge that if we trusted him, he would place us right where we needed to be for his purposes and kingdom. And I wish I had time to tell you all the stories of how I know he chose our house and our neighborhood in Texas. Now, I believe God has also strategically placed believers all over the world, each of you where you live, so that unbelievers will eventually find the one their hearts long for. But Jesus didn't want his disciples or us to stop there. He wanted them and us to move out into ever widening circles of influence. That's the way Jesus described it in Acts 1:8. He told them to start in their home city of Jerusalem, but move to the whole region of Judea where their own people lived, and then to the neighboring Gentile areas, and then to the ends of the earth, anywhere and everywhere. If every believer would take this to heart and multiply the life of Christ within them, through discipleship, the world would be reached with the gospel. Now, I'm not saying that every person will accept Jesus' offer, but every person, like my friend Sue, will know that someone cared enough to tell them about it. I like how Crew looks at the goal of fulfilling the Great Commission. It's when everyone knows someone who truly follows Jesus. Also, for years, I've heard that spiritual multiplication comes by winning, building, and sending. We win people to Christ and build them in their faith and then send them to win, build, and send others. Spiritual generation after spiritual generation. Thankfully, his disciples embraced the Great Commission. In fact, I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but we are here tonight because the disciples obeyed. So the same commission is given to us. Go. The first step begins with taking the initiative to connect with people, not for an ulterior motive, but for the ultimate purpose of introducing them to Christ. Baptize. Now, though I've never baptized anyone, since this is usually done in some fashion through a public ceremony, I have invited many to join me in following Jesus and asking them to identify with him. And then teaching. This step requires you not just to instruct these disciples, but notice that it says to instruct them to obey everything Christ has commanded. Knowledge without any application leads to pride and egotism. We're to offer truth, yes, but we must model what it looks like to live it. So one additional observation before I close, comes from my decades-long practice of making disciples. Though beginning the discipleship process by introducing someone to Christ and walking with them as they grow spiritually is fantastic when it happens, it isn't always that tidy. Since discipleship is a lifelong experience, we may intersect someone else's life at any point along the process. The interaction might be brief, like on a plane or in a store, or long. I have a woman that I've been meeting with for over 10 years. We may lead someone to Christ or meet them after they have known Jesus for a while. But when we walk with Jesus and look for the opportunity to make disciples, God can use us at any point in someone's life to set them on a path toward fulfilling the Great Commission too.